Guys, I'm really excited today because we have another PNSO model. We were all worried about the fate of PNSO last year, so starting 2025 off with Spiclypeus and following so closely with another model is a promising start to more consistency this year. Just look at this box. You can already tell what a beautiful model this is going to be. Now the remains for Stellasaurus are actually pretty sparse, but we do have enough of the skull to create a reasonable idea for how it might look, and enough to know it had quite interesting features. Now here it is out of the box, and we can't help but notice the beautiful coloration immediately. Yes, I know, it's brown with stripes again, but look at this. There's a kind of darkish brown, and the stripes go horizontally with a slight squiggly pattern. That's how squiggles should be done if they're done at all. Notice how they don't look like they sit painted over the skin. On top, there's a band of very dark brown, and near the front, there's a reddish brown tone, and also around parts of the tail. This balances out the reddish orange you'll see in the spikes on the frill, and on the recurved nose horn. It all ties together incredibly well in terms of overall visual harmony. Now Stellasaurus was estimated to be about 5 meters or 16.4 feet long, though the fossil remains are quite fragmentary. If I measure this model along this curve, I get around 17 centimeters or 6.7 inches, which scales it to about 1 to 30. Now that's larger than true 1 to 35 scale. For comparison, a true 1 to 35 scale for a 5 meter animal would be more the size of a large Cosmoceratops here. The pose is dynamic, a little confrontational, and almost aggressive. It's like it's facing off a rival or a potential predator. Almost all views look good, and I'm surprised how badass the front looks and how much I love it. Now let's take a closer look at the head, the most distinctive feature of any ceratopsian. Now, while Stellasaurus remains are limited, we do have enough to know of the presence of a few spikes, which gets interesting from an evolutionary perspective. For now, it's enough to note the prominent P3, P4, and then after that, the remaining epiparietals are more like tabs, creating a crenulated look. This scalloped appearance is nicely captured in the model. There isn't a true EPS across the parieto-squamosal junction. On our model, where I think this division is, I see what might be a pseudo-EPS on the right, while on the left there doesn't seem to be one. We have a part of the left postorbital. The O here stands for the orbit, where the eyeball is. The posterior half of the supraorbital ornamentation is preserved, enough to suggest that even a full reconstruction would still be short and incipient, such as seen in Styracosaurus. And here their diminutive nature is reflected, though I think the horns could be a bit more posterior. Then finally, there's the nasal horn core, which is slightly recurved and elongate. Accordingly, reconstructions such as this one by Andrea Tuchin show a massive recurved horn. And we see that here. It's laterally compressed, which is also nicely represented from the front. And here there's a nice ring texture around the base of the horn. The fading on the horn is really well done, from the base to the tip of the horn. On the snout, there's more green blending, a sharp beak, and even some detail in the teeth. Yes, you can actually see the side teeth here. That's impressive detailing. The eyes are strikingly painted, with a kind of electric blue in the sclera. There's a rather stark white streak around the eye, which adds contrast, but it's quite soft and looks quite good against that electric blue. In the frill, I especially love how the eye spots are done, subtle and very natural looking. You'll see the merest infusion of what looks like cyan to me, which is also faded into the snout, so we see that kind of tie-in I've mentioned before. There's a faint squiggle on the squamosal, but again beautifully blended. Moving down into the body, you'll see the same attention to coloration. The shoulder area has a beautiful infusion of almost a rust red color. The musculature is well sculpted, and is always a nice area to admire the scalation. And as we move down the arm and forearm, you can see skin folds and muscle definition. The toes are also correctly sculpted and aligned. And the unguals on digits 1 to 3 are well represented. Now flipping over to the other side, just look at that dry brushing. It really makes the textures pop. Across the body, notice how fine the surface detailing is. That's what gives it that lifelike feel. You really have to hold it in hand to appreciate how the light catches those textures and reveal more each time you play around with the angles. Down the thigh and calf. There's a natural flow to the musculature, punctuated of course with the skin detail that PNSO is known for. And even the tail follows that rhythm, with the stripes and the scale details aligning beautifully with the muscle contours, ending with the dark rust red that we saw in the shoulder. The paint application really flows organically, making the whole thing feel like a living, breathing animal. And up across here, you have a very wide band of dark brown. And what might seem like a part not worth looking at actually hides very beautiful and intricate detail, which is rewarded only by paying attention and viewing the area from different angles. You see here the very fine, very minute scales. And it's real because not all detail in a real animal is advertised loudly. And likewise on the underside, we're not at all shortchanged, as we're treated to a variety of shapes and sizes in that beautiful chainmail. So that's the Stellasaurus model from PNSO. Now let's talk a bit of science and the significance of Stellasaurus and why I'm delighted to have it. The Centrosaurines are a subgroup of centrosaurines, as you see here from the Wilson 2020 paper, and redrawn here more clearly by Pachyrhinosaurus 1905. In our case, we're interested in the Pachyrhinosaurine. This tribe is composed of taxa that, as proposed by Wilson et al., make up an anagenetic lineage that begins with Styracosaurus and ends with Pachyrhinosaurus. Their whole analysis is fascinating and well worth a read, and I'll reference the article below, but I'll just give you the bare bones. There are two main ways that evolution might happen. There's cladogenesis, in which branching into multiple taxa takes place. Supporting evidence of this would be taxa that are contemporaneous, with individually diagnosable autapomorphies. Then there's anagenesis, involving a single unbranched lineage over time. Now here, taxa must appear sequentially in the fossil record, with intermediate and transitional morphology. As such, each taxa may lack outright autapomorphies, and rather diagnosed by unique combinations of various ancestral characters. In the past, I've touched on two examples of this. First, in the progression from the Spiclypeus thorosus to wilsoni to honori. Then the Fowler and Fowler proposal in the Chasmosaurines from Utah ceratops to Pentaceratops, then ending with Anchiceratops. In the case of Stellasaurus, Wilson et al. Proposed an anagenetic lineage that begins with Styracosaurus and progresses with Stellasaurus, Ioneosaurus, Archaeosaurus, and Pachyrhinosaurus. There's no stratigraphic overlap, as these genera are found in sequential order within the two-Madsen formation, and each of them demonstrate features intermediate between predecessor and successor. Most obviously, and probably of greatest interest to us, will be the changes seen in the epiparietals. Beginning with Styracosaurus, we see elongate P3, P4, and a partially elongate P5. It also has an elongate erect nasal horn and small supraorbital horns. Stellasaurus still has an elongate P3, partially elongate P4, and non-elongate P5. So, P4 and P5 have shortened relative to Styracosaurus. It too has an elongate nasal horn, which is recurved, and small supraorbital nubs. Moving to Ioneosaurus, we see elongate P3s, but P4 is either much reduced, for example in MOR 373, and even non-elongate in MOR 456. It has of course that large procurved nasal horn, and the supraorbitals have round bone masses. Archaeosaurus only has an elongate P3 with P4 fully reduced. In addition, the nasal horn has given way to a low nasal boss, and it now has high-ridged supraorbital bosses. Then, when you get to Pachyrhinosaurus, it retains an elongate P3, but now both the nasal and supraorbital bosses have become much more pronounced and robust. And from this, Wilson et al. Also suggest an interesting idea, which is that sexual selection led to a change over time in cranial ornamentation. From Centrosaurus to Styracosaurus to Stellasaurus, there's little change in nasal and supraorbital horn size. The parietals, however, show dramatic changes from Centrosaurus to Styracosaurus. Now this suggests strong selective pressure on the parietal ornamentation, which were the primary focus for socio-sexual selection. The ladies were less interested in the face. Stellasaurus, however, marks the early stages of simplifying the parietal decorations. P4 and P5 have reduced, and P1 may have been absent altogether. It's also the last Eucentrosaurin to have a simple hypertrophied nasal horn and small supraorbital horns. Because following Stellasaurus, the facial ornamentation takes over, particularly in the Pachyrhinosaurines. Ioneosaurus now has a procurved horn core. Archaeosaurus starts to develop nasal and supraorbital bosses instead. And in Pachyrhinosaurus, this emphasis on facial boss modification is taken to an extreme. And all this while, the parietals become simpler, shortened, and reduced, especially P4 and P5. That's what happens when the ladies lose interest in the hair and start focusing on the face. I wish that were true in humans. Alright, let's look at some comparisons. First up, the previous PNSO Spiclypeus. You can see immediately how nicely colored both the heads are, but in considering also the body, the Stellasaurus is more pleasing overall. I mentioned before that Spiclypeus seems to have reached a new level of refinement in the scales, and this has carried over to today's Stellasaurus. Then we bring in the PNSO Styracosaurus, which kicks off the centrosaurine anagenetic lineage. You can see how the number of epiparietals begins to reduce along that chain. And here's the Haolonggu version of Styracosaurus, which is closer to the 135 scale than most of us like. And man, if only Haolonggu would finally give us their Styracosaurus. We'll skip that, and next we have to jump to the PNSO Pachyrhinosaurus. This is still one of my favorites. Such a bruiser, and you can see the proposed endpoint with these massive facial bosses. Here's the Haolonggu Pachyrhinosaurus. It might also be interesting to see the Haolonggu Triceratops, one of the best models of that genus that I have. And from PNSO, the last offering from last year, the low-key ceratops. Finally, let's bring in the PNSO Wilson T-Rex and the Cameron T-Rex. So that's it for the PNSO Stellasaurus. It's wonderful to have PNSO back with another high-quality release. Now, many of us were genuinely concerned about the company's future, and I hope that with these two so close apart, it's a sign of things to come for 2025. PNSO has had a pattern of giving us multiple dinosaurs from the same clade, like they did with the Tyrannosaurids and the Carcharodontosaurids. If they're continuing the same trend with the ceratopsians, I'm definitely not complaining, given how good these last models were, and I think the heads are morphologically different enough to be interesting. I'm excited to fill out the ceratopsian phylogeny. Let me know what you think as always, and I'll see you in the next video.